And again, welcome to the large audience we have today. I would introduce a new auditor. Our new auditor is Ashley Stroschein. Ashley, welcome to the auditing committee and to the auditors downstairs. Would you give us about a 1 minute elevator talk and tell us a little bit about yourself?
I don't know how to work this. Okay. Hi, I'm Ashley Stroschein. Nice to meet all of you. I think I've met most of you besides Jason. Nice to meet you. I came from Meta Bank prior to this, and before that I was with a state for 6-7 years. So, okay. And things are going good.
Good. Well, I know we're happy to have you, so welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Appreciated.
I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Wednesday, September 16th, 2015. Arnie?
Second.
Seth seconded. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have some reports today and a fairly large agenda here. So I'm going to get started and invite Dean Buckneberg up to tell us a little bit about the financial statement, update of the external audit of the city's financial statement.
Well, good afternoon. Rich, do you have that PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Get that.
And you want to get Brian on the phone?
Right, and we need to get Brian Stavanger on the phone as well.
Well, we'll call him from this.
Oh, from that, okay.
Yeah.
Well, by way of introduction, this meeting kicks off the 2015 audit process for the City of Sioux Falls, which is done on the financial statements and also on federal financial assistance in accordance with uniform guidance. And so we want to begin that process by talking about what's new, what are the new risks that we need to address this year. We want to have a two-way conversation with all of the relevant items that we should be considering. We've been doing the audit for a number of years, so we're familiar with personnel and the risk areas as we've established them in the past, but things change. And so we want to make sure that there is an open process and that we ask the appropriate questions as we get ready to kick off this process. We have a PowerPoint that you see hopefully in front of you. It's going to walk us through.
Find out if your partner is here.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh,
Okay.
Good.
All right. I just wasn't
it's working.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, welcome, Brian. Okay,
Thank you.
We've just started talking about the audit process, kicking that off. We do have the signed audit engagement letter relative to this year's audit. I've received that just this afternoon. We'll make sure that gets over to Peer as well. And so the items that we want to touch base on a little bit today, sort of the service team you see there before you. Brian Stavanger, one of our partners in Fargo, is responsible for the audit. My responsibilities are on an overall basis with the overall engagement. And Miranda Gallagher, who's been involved before from our Sioux Falls office, will be involved again, primarily with the financial statement audit side. Jamie Fay will be heading up the uniform guidance or single audit work. And then there will be various other members from our Sioux Falls and Fargo offices that are involved with the audit. I'm going to ask Brian to maybe walk us through the objectives and the risks. And so if you're ready to do that, Brian.
Yes, I sure am. Thank you all for allowing me to call in for this meeting again. And what I'll do is walk through really the last three items from the table of contents, the audit objectives, the audit approach, and recent or new professional standards. You know, right off the bat, when we were looking, or when Dean was going through the service team, he referred to Jamie Fay and Fargo really leading the uniform guidance or single audit. And that really is one of the big changes this year, is on the federal grant awards that are spent by the city. It was the audit process, the audit guidance was completely revamped, and that is all now effective for the 2015 audit. I think the biggest change that you'll see as an audit committee is different terminology. It's no longer officially referred to as a single audit or an A133 audit. There's a lot of new words out there. I'm going to call it a federal audit, just to try to be consistent that it is over federal grants. So in the audit objectives, we'll perform the audit in accordance with the generally accepted audit standards. We'll follow government audit standards, and also the rest of that language on the first bullet is related to the federal audit. We're going to do procedures to obtain reasonable but not absolute assurance that everything in the financial statements is materially accurate. So we are not going to look at 100% of the transactions going on through the city, but we will look at a sample of those and then provide you, at the end of the process, reasonable assurance on those financial statements. So what will the audit procedures include? Those really haven't changed over the years. We're going to examine on a test basis or sample supporting amounts and disclosures. We're going to have discussions with management. We're also going to have discussions with other employees throughout the city. So we want to get not only management's perspective on the processes that are in place, but we want to talk to employees and get their thoughts on that too, just to ensure that the two match up. One of the bigger items that we spend our time on is looking at significant estimates. So there are 4 identified significant estimates with the city's financial statements: incurred but not reported, or IBNR claims, other post-employment benefits, OPEB, the landfill closure and post-closure costs, and the new one this year, pension assets. The state of South Dakota has calculated what that will be, and I can tell you in most states it's actually a pension liability, but in the state of South Dakota there is a pension asset. So that will be a new asset that will show up on your financial statements. We will obtain schedules and actuarial reports from the Department of Legislative Audit, and we'll incorporate that into our audit process, and then the city staff will incorporate all the new asset number as well as the disclosures that come along with that in the financial statements. Next slide would be our audit approach. So starting really last month in November and continuing through this month, with this audit committee meeting being a part of that, is our planning. So we've been in touch with the city to consider any changes to the environment, changes to internal control. We discuss with internal audit what their procedures have been throughout the year, if they have any concerns or if they have any findings that have come up. We'll conduct our fraud inquiries, and really that's just interviews with management and employees. And one of the questions that we would ask is, in your job, would you be able to commit any type of fraud? As in, identify those holes in the process. Hopefully the answer is, I can't think of any, but every once in a while we will get an answer of somewhere where their potential fraud could occur, and that's where we're definitely going to focus our testing on. And during the planning process, also discuss any new accounting changes. Last year at this time, the new accounting software that the city was implementing was definitely something that came up. This year it's more about the implementation of some new accounting standards, specifically those pension assets that will need to be audited and then disclosed in the financial statement. We'll continue on through January, performing interim testing. We'll confirm the timing and the expectations of the audit. We'll do some fraud and risk assessment, review internal controls, discuss and review any new and significant transactions. and then we'll start to collect all of the data where we will then use that to make our sample selections for our year-end procedures. Next slide talks about year-end testing. So once we get to actual on-site, we call it on-site field work, when we come on-site to the city offices and sit down for a few weeks and start working on the audit and doing the testing, we take a risk-based approach. So we look at all of the different balances and transactions of the city, and I'll have those detailed out in a few slides. And we identify each one of those, and then we determine where we're going to spend more of our time testing based on risk. And like I said, we'll talk more about that in a few slides. We'll test account balances, look at unique transactions. Those significant estimates, that's when we're going to spend a lot of our time testing those significant estimates. We're going to do our federal grant audit, and we're going to review our work and the financial statements that are prepared by city staff. And then finally, come April, we will conclude the audit process by meeting with the audit committee once again and going through the results of the 2015 audit. The next slide is talking about new accounting changes, and I mentioned these already, but GASB 68, which is the pension standard. So again, we'll work with the DLA to get all that information and then coordinate the testing and the disclosures and all of that with city staff. The super circular, that's that federal grant, and it really is a sweeping reform of the federal grant operations and testing. It will change our audit approach. There are certain items that we used to have to look at that we will no longer have to look at. The federal government has identified some of the items that they just don't think we need to look at anymore, and they want us to focus more on some of the other areas. So there will be a little bit of change there, not a lot. The biggest change potentially can come from the amount of programs that we have to test, the amount of programs or federal grants that we have to test. There is the possibility that that would decrease. If that decreases, that would reduce the amount of work that we would need to perform. It would take some time off of city staff that they would have to dedicate to us testing more programs or grants. And in turn, in the accordance with our agreement, you would then save some money on audit costs. So as we get into planning, more planning for the federal audit, we'll determine exactly what we'll need to test. But those are just some of the potential changes that could happen. And of course, we'll report all of this back to you in April and let you know how things went. The last 3 slides are dedicated to risk assessment, which I had mentioned we'd go through. I'm not going to go through in detail, but just to give you a high-level look at how we assess the risk for all the different audit areas, we look at inherent risk, that inherently there could be a misstatement. And then we look at fraud risk, which is that fraud could occur, the risk that fraud could occur in the accounting records, or we'll say inventory or assets. So we're always assessing based on inherent and fraud risk, and really the combination of those two. So the next 2 slides, which I'm not going to go through each one of them in detail, you can certainly go through those at your own leisure, but just to give you an idea of how, or I guess what we have arrived at for all these different audit areas for risk assessment. And like I said before, that is really what drives our testing during the audit process. We're going to spend more time and do more procedures in the areas that we've identified to have a higher risk, both inherently and fraud. So I think at this time, I'll turn it back over to Dean, since he's got eyes and can see if anyone's raising their hands, but to see if anyone has any questions or comments about our plan for the audit process this year.
And I think we could add to that, these risk assessments are initial, they're fluid, they change as we walk through the audit and as we obtain more information. And one of the ways we obtain information, as was discussed, was interviewing staff, but that includes the audit committee. So we'd certainly be interested if there's any concerns that any of you have that we should maybe focus on as we walk through the audit, go through the audit, and if you don't have any specific items today, as you might think of something in the future, please, contact myself or Brian, and we'll make sure that gets considered. It's a two-way. We want to have a two-way conversation on this. So it's all preliminary. At this standpoint, the planning process is important. It takes time, and that risk assessment's a big part of it. So any questions or thoughts?
Questions, anyone? Yes, Rich.
This is probably a question for Brian, but for example, in the enterprise funds, is there any testing done to make sure that funds that are in the enterprise funds stay in the enterprise funds and aren't used to pay general fund expenses, for example?
Throughout our testing of expenditures and some of the compliance work that we do, we're not only looking at controls, because controls are a very important part of it, but also we'll call it I'm at a loss for the right word. I guess really the reasonableness of the expense. So we do have some testing specifically around expenses, and part of that is it a reasonable expense for where it has been expended? So, for example, if we're looking at an expense in one of those enterprise funds, and we notice that it appears to be an expense for a general fund or a capital projects fund or one of those other governmental funds, that would definitely throw up a red flag, and that would be something that we would investigate further. So really, to answer your question, yes, we do have some tests designed around the reasonableness of expenditures and making sure they're being spent on the right purposes out of the right funds.
Okay. Anyone else? I have a few. First of all, I like the idea that you're bringing some people down from outside in to do our audit. I think that's good to have somebody that's not in the Sioux Falls area, that kind of thing. But could you pick a different city than Fargo?
Well, we want to make sure we bring in people that have the appropriate background and experience.
I'm sure. I just couldn't get that little dig in. I know, I had to have that. And I appreciate looking at this from the standpoint of the timing this year. We got a little waylaid last year and didn't get the final report until August or September or something like that, I think, and appreciate the timing on that. I have a thing, I guess, with the pension plan. So I'm interested in how this pension asset is going to be done and how we're looking at that. And are you going to look also then at the internal retirement funds that we have, to make sure that they are reasonable also then? Is that's
Brian, I'm
always
going to
part of
let
it?
you address that.
Yep. Yeah, those internal funds that you have, those have always been a part of our audit process. And I know we've talked about them in previous years, just about the funding level and all of those. So those will continue to be a part of our audit process. It's really just adding on this new one, which is this really what most people would consider an outside pension, where the assets and the liabilities appear to be held by an outside entity. And what that standard really is doing is recognizing, or what the intent is that, those potential liabilities, unfunded liabilities, really don't lie with a statewide plan, but they lie within all of the participating governments. And so it's just allocating out that statewide liability in the state of South Dakota. It's an asset, but it's allocating it out to all the participating members based on their annual contributions. So Really, to answer your question, we'll continue to do the same work we've always done with the internal, and this will just be a new one, which we will definitely talk about come April. We'll make sure to point it out and where it shows up in that CAFR document.
Yeah, it's one of those assets that'll be on there that we don't want to spend.
Right.
One other one, and that is, I noticed on the risk assessment that you had, that slide, there were no high-risk areas. Can you give us, at least I didn't see any, I saw low and moderate. Do we automatically do all the high risks, or are we on an annual basis, or do we, or why aren't there some high-risk ones here, or are there none in Sioux Falls, which would be a great answer?
Yeah, the easy answer is there are no. We have not identified any high-risk areas, and when we identify that risk, a lot of it does have to do with the internal control structure that you have. So in a smaller entity, and specifically a smaller city where there's less staff and really less controls, there definitely are high-risk areas. So the controls are a big factor, but also the quality of the accounting that's done at the city. If on an annual basis when we do the audit, we are having to make multiple adjustments to the financial statements, that would indicate a higher risk, and we simply have not had those adjustments. So, really it's a combination of the internal control structure is very strong at the City of Sioux Falls. The addition of an internal audit department, which is not very common in a lot of the cities that I work with, really, really helps with that, because instead of just on an annual basis, when the outside auditors come in and ask questions and perform tests, the internal audit is really serving that function 12 months a year, which really helps. And then also, as I said, the quality of the accounting staff and the annual accounting that we review, nothing really has allowed it to get to a high risk.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Dean.
But your highest risks involve those significant estimates. And, whether or not we classify it as high risk or not, I mean, that's where we're definitely going to be paying attention to that. And so, and that could change. Our assessment could change as we go.
Yep. I see our, did you have something? No. I see our finance director is in the audience. Is there anything you'd like to add, Tracy? No. Everything must be copacetic over there, running smoothly as usual. Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you very much, Dean and Brian. We look forward to working with you over the next 3-4 months, and we'll be hearing from you again. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the review of the annual audit for 2016. Rich?
Yeah, I'm going to have Ashley, she's going to put up a little Excel spreadsheet. It just kind of shows the audit coverage from 2009 to 2015. And that's kind of a little tool that I used to come up with this annual audit plan. You should have a hard copy with you, and she'll put up that little Excel spreadsheet, and then she'll also put up the plan up on the screen. As far as coming up with this annual audit plan, it has to go through the audit committee, and then I present it to the full council for their approval. Usually in the fall, I start out with an email to the directors and an email to the elected officials, the mayor and the council members, asking if they would want something included or for consideration on the annual audit plan. And I did get some response this year, which I'll go into in a couple minutes. But up on the screen there, you can see kind of the audit coverage. Over on the left column, it says MOU division. That's major organization unit, and it's basically by in order of expenditures. So public works, water, police, fire, they spend, a lot more money than the MOUs and the divisions that are down the list there. And it just kind of gives me a visual when I'm looking at our audit coverage to say, okay, we haven't audited this department ever. And some we just may never, like the city attorney, for example, or HR. Sometimes we try to audit where the money is spent, and some of the departments just don't spend a lot of money. Some of the other factors we look at are, if we had problems in the past, if there's opportunities for improvement or service improvements, we consider that. But we give a lot of weight to request from management and from elected officials. And we get requests from both of those frequently. So I think we'll go to the audit plan next, that Word document. We'll just kind of run through that. So I did make one change on what I sent to the audit committee by email and what was posted on the agenda for the meeting. And just go down to the next page there, Ashley. I put that in yellow there. That was the only change I made. I just made that yesterday. But as far as audits that we're proposing for next year, we're proposing the construction manager at risk process. That was a request from city council members. The CM at risk is a relatively new construction method the city's using. The event center used that process. The aquatic center, which is in progress, that is using that process. And there's 2 projects that are on the horizon that will use that process. One would be the administrative building that will be just north of the current city hall. And also what's called I think it's called the Bluffs. It's kind of that multi-use parking facility that it'll be on the west side of the river. Okay. And then it'll be a private development, but there will be a city parking ramp associated. Is it called the Banks? Not the Bluffs, the Banks, excuse me. So we're looking at that process. It's relatively new. We're proposing to look at the internal controls that are functioning to ensure that the change orders are properly approved, because it's a little slightly different process. To make sure that the guaranteed maximum price is not exceeded, what's the controls to make sure that doesn't happen? How do we make sure we get the specified quality of materials and construction? And that competitive process to select the most qualified contractor, we'll look at that, make sure that's a competitive process. We solicit bids, and then there's a committee that selects the most qualified contractor. So we're kind of looking at those 4 areas. And that was, like I said, that was a request of several council members, so we put that on the audit plan. The next one, citywide cash, that was a request to the mayor, and I'd met with the mayor and the directors maybe 6-8 weeks ago. We talked about that briefly. What we're going to do with the assistance of the city finance office is just identify every place in the city where we receive cash, and that's defined as, checks, currency, coins, credit cards, any type of payment that we receive. Identify those locations, and then try to identify, by volume, and then if it's possible, it might be helpful to know what percentage of checks are received at this location. So we'll kind of come up with a survey of all the areas, and then we're going to look at, make sure that we have up-to-date written procedures for all those locations. Look at the physical security of the cash at the location. Look at adequate segregation of duties, and then I added to look at the voids and refunds, make sure they're documented there and that they're reviewed by a supervisor, because that could be a fraud risk. That could be a way to misappropriate cash, as if you were issuing lots of voids and then just pocketing the money. So we'll make sure that each location has a control over that. And the other thing was just make sure that deposits are made timely. And that could be more of an efficiency thing, that make sure that we don't have locations where we're holding the cash for weeks. I've looked at other audit reports from other cities, and once in a while they'll come across a situation where a department or an office is, they kind of collect the cash, and then when they get around to it, they make the deposit. When the box gets full, they might have checks in there for a month or something, and it may not make sense to make a deposit daily. Maybe the volume isn't sufficient, but certainly not keeping stuff for a month. So kind of looking at those areas. We wanted to also look at, with the assistance of the finance department, looking at those, identifying those miscellaneous revenue streams. What I'm talking about is money that comes in the city that wasn't invoiced. You're not necessarily expecting it. You didn't invoice for it. It might be, say, a COBRA insurance premium that goes to HR, maybe, possibly. It could be, some sort of manufacturer rebate. Some of these odd miscellaneous revenue streams, if we can identify those might be more at risk for being diverted, because, if nobody was expecting it, nobody might miss it if doesn't show up on the books. You know what I mean? So we'll look at that. One thing that I came across when I was at a conference, which I'll talk about here at the end of the meeting, it was something called the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, and when I was at the conference 2 weeks ago, they talked about that. That's sort of the best practices for protecting your the information on credit cards that you receive for payment. So we'll make inquiries of management about that. And one thing the mayor wanted us to look at too, when he requested this, was looking at, okay, I want to know, where we receive the money, and do we have controls, and then what about when we disperse the money? That's going to be addressed in the accounts payable audit, which is on the second page of the annual audit plan. So those are kind of the new audits for next year. Other activities, what we always do, technical assistance to committees and city council members and departments. Special projects, quick response audits, we have those almost every year. The fraud hotline, if we had a call come in to the fraud hotline and that needed to be investigated, we would become involved in that. We do a report every year on the follow-up on the status of the audit recommendations. You'll get that at the next audit committee meeting. And then ongoing audit activities. That's stuff like reviewing the effectiveness, and we have various anti-fraud controls that we look at. One thing purchasing had requested that we look at, maybe doing some desk audits of procurement activity. It would be just stuff you could do in a few hours, when you're kind of between audits. So we'll be talking with Scott Rust in purchasing a little bit more about that. We could do some testing of asset accountability. We're using more and more of software to do some analysis of data. Dave Bixler from the council office has been helpful. He's got a lot of Excel skills, and we've been kind of experimenting with using Excel as a tool to analyze data, looking for anomalies. And I won't bore you with the details, but it gets rather technical. But Dave is a good resource in our city council office. The next bullet, or the next category, is that continuing professional development. We have to do that every year to maintain our certification, and we use conferences, webinars, local seminars, that sort of thing, as our training budget allows. We have quite a few audits that were on the plan of 2015 that are carrying forward into 2016. We have a cable TV franchise fee audit. We haven't started that yet, but we're going to carry that into next year. Accounts payable, which I just mentioned, looking at the controls over accounts payable. Information technology. Affordable housing is another one. And then lastly, that follow-up to the fuel control audit. We did a fuel control audit in 2011, and this will be just a follow-up to that. And analysis of, this was requested by Public Works, of various energy-saving projects that the city has commenced. Two examples are replacing the conventional bulbs and traffic signals with more efficient technology, and also installing those LED street lights. And that's what we want to see. Is it really saving the money that we thought it would save? And looking at that. And the other one was the adaptive traffic control systems, to see if those places where they've put those cameras in on the street lights on various locations, if they're improving the traffic flow and if they're increasing the safety, looking at the information and see if it makes sense. So those are more analysis than they are audits. So that's what we have for 2016. It's kind of a full schedule there. So I would urge your support of that. And like I said, that will have to go to the full council for approval by resolution. But I would seek endorsement by the audit committee. So.
We have a motion to move that on to the full council?
So moved.
So moved. Second? Second? Any discussion? Any suggestions, discussions? Hearing none. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, Ashley's going to put up our annual report. A lot of this doesn't change from year to year. We always put down our mission, our vision, our goals, and objectives, and that hasn't changed any. Our mission is to help the city achieve the highest efficiency and effectiveness with integrity. And we list our mission and our goals and objectives. And then we also list our current staff. We had the change that, you've been introduced to Ashley. So we're up to full strength now with myself and with Kim and with Ashley. And, I put down the certifications that we have there, which we're very proud of that. And then our put down the professional credentials and our professional organization and memberships. We're active in the Association of Local Government Auditors, ALGA, and we're also active in the local chapter of the Institute of Internal Auditors here in Sioux Falls. And I'm a member of the South Dakota CPA Society. And we strive to get approximately 40 hours of CPE every year for our auditors. Especially the ones that have certification like myself and Kim, we have to report that, how many hours we get every year. For 2015, I calculated we had 106 hours combined hours for our 3 staff of continuing professional education. And one of the most important things we have to do as auditors to maintain our professional standards is to have independence and objectivity. Independence is defined as where we are on the org chart, who we report to. We report to the audit committee. We don't report to the people that we audit. So we achieve our independence that way. And objectivity is more of a state of mind, that we're supposed to be, as much as possible, be free of bias, that we don't go into an audit with the conclusion already determined. And we just had training with our staff. I do that every year. We have annual training on independence and objectivity, is the importance of that. And that before I assign, say, Kim or Ashley to an audit, I have them fill out a piece of paper and say, like, you're going to be doing this audit. Is there any reason why you can't be objective? Or, any reason why maybe I shouldn't assign you to that audit? For example, if you have a relative working in that department, or you've had a prior... let's say you had a big argument with that director last year and you don't feel like you can be objective because you have a bias, a mental bias, you have to let me know that so either we can mitigate that or assign another auditor. So we do that every year. We document that training. We put it in the file. It's something that peer reviewers would look at too. That we have the annual training, and then every audit work paper would have that piece of paper saying, I've assigned Ashley to this audit, and she's declaring to me that she doesn't have any reason why she would not be able to be objective about that situation. So that's what that is. We list the audit committee, little information. And a lot of this is just for, if somebody was interested in what do internal auditors do, and it just has a little information about the audit committee. And at the close of 2015, and we're at full strength there, and I listed the terms there for our citizen members. I know we have Arnie will be, I think May of 2016 will be your, so we'll have to get a decision from Arnie either to whatever he wants to do at the end of his term, but we're at full strength there, so. The pay is great, isn't it? So. As far as the work accomplished, we didn't accomplish all the audit projects that we wanted to. We had to carry forward quite a few. Part of that was because we lost an auditor in the summer, and then we had a gap there. And then we had 3 special requests. We had the transit, and we had 2 other requests. So that put us behind a little bit. So anyway, I kind of listed what was on the 2015 plan there. And then at the bottom of page 4, I put down, I said all projects are completed and reviewed with those exceptions, those bullet points that carry over to page 5. And I put those all on the 2016 plan, which we just reviewed. The storm drainage audit is in progress. I'm assigned to that one. And as is the construction contract, I'll be wrapping that one up very soon. And as far as those special requests in 2015 there, the transit one's complete, and the accounts receivable, Kim has started that audit already, and Ashley, her first audit is at sanitary landfill cash controls. And
Sent you to the junkyard right away, huh?
Right away, yeah. That's a good one to get started on, yeah. So she got the tour from the manager out there, so that was interesting. We had 12 recommendations in 2015. All audit clients concurred with all the audit recommendations. However, we do always follow up, because just because somebody concurred doesn't mean necessarily that it got implemented. So we have a process to track that and then follow up with management. And then I'll make the report on that, the annual report, at our next audit committee meeting in April. And then at the very end of the report, I put in the FAQs, the frequently asked questions. That's more for people that aren't familiar with internal audit. So, so the report is designed for the public, primarily for people that aren't familiar with what we do. So I would seek your approval of that report.
I would entertain a motion to accept or to approve the report, and then I'll take questions.
Move to approve.
Second, okay. Counselor Karski?
Yeah. Interesting, the professional designations, that type of thing. Ongoing education. Do you have in your budget anything to encourage that, or is
Yes,
that on their
yeah.
own?
I was
How do we
put
do
that in our budget. We put, I want to say roughly $3,000, and we're going to ask permission to send 2 of our staff to a conference here next year. We try to be careful about, try to get the most bang out of the buck for our training dollar. A lot of times we can do a webinar and just sitting at a desk. I did one last week with Dave Bixler, and we just had a 1-hour webinar, and I think that cost $50. It was on how using Excel for audit techniques. So more and more webinars are available, but it's really good to go to stuff where you do face-to-face meetings, which I did 2 weeks ago. I'll talk about that, I think, our next item here.
And a lot of that stuff is self-study.
Yeah, there's self-study available. Yeah, self-study, webinars, local seminars. Usually our II chapter will do one in the spring, like a 2-day, and those are pretty inexpensive. And then usually a national conference is very helpful, especially for networking. So
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've talked about is the assignment of time and that kind of thing that we talked about. You were going to put that together, and I'm assuming that's kind of on your radar too.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay, did we vote on that?
No, not yet.
Okay, let's see, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And then secondly, or almost lastly, your trip to, was this one in Puerto Rico? China?
No, the Kansas City metro area, specifically Overland Park. So it was 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago today that I left for Overland Park. Unfortunately, the weather was cooperative to travel, both coming and going. I've gone, I think this is the 5th one I've been to. This is sponsored by the federal auditors, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. And they started these years ago to make it an inexpensive way for federal auditors to get their training, that continuing education. But they invite state auditors and they invite local auditors. So there was about 115 folks down there. They had every year. They seemed like they have to get a bigger room, and it was well represented at all 3 levels were well represented. It was all day Thursday, and then I stayed until noon on Friday. Just because I had to drive back. The conference actually went till 4 o'clock on Friday, but it's about a 5.5, 6 hour drive, so I didn't take as many hours of continuing ed. But very, very good. Each year it seems to get better, and I wrote down some of the takeaways that there's a big emphasis the last 2 years at this forum as protecting data security in governments. So a lot of the federal, the state, local auditors are looking at protecting data security in their systems, so that's a big focus now. It's a big threat, and they talked a lot about that. One thing they're doing more, especially at the local level, is they're looking at what they call PII, personally identifiable information, that, say, a local government will collect birth dates, social security numbers, credit card information, bank account information, and medical information. For example, somebody signs up for a rec league at the park department. They pay by a credit card, so the park department would have that credit card information. Or patients go to the Sioux Valley Health, the health clinic, and obviously there's a lot of personal information there. there's a lot of city departments that collect various information, and so the audits that are being done more and more are looking at, well, how does our city protect that information? You know, do we have a written procedure? Have we trained our employees? Where is it located? How much information do we have exactly, and do we know? And the city of Austin, Texas had done one 2 years ago, and they talked about it at last year's conference. And then the city of Kansas City did one this year because they saw what Austin had done, and they did the same type of audit. And that was very interesting to see how that information is being protected and what needs to, you know, training your employees. And what do you do if you have a breach? What if you find out that you've lost some information? What's the protocol and that sort of thing? So that was very interesting. Another thing that's becoming more and more common is doing what they call phishing attack. You know, fishing with PH, not you know, going for trout or something. And they send out an email to city employees and just try to get them to respond to a link on an email and give their, you know, sign-in information, that sort of thing. That's being done more and more to just test to make sure that employees don't do that. And then the response of the IT department if that were to happen, if you did have a phishing attack. So that was very interesting. Something near to you, Councilor Rolfing, is public pension funding. And we had a presentation by a professor at Wichita State about the academic research on proper pension funding. That was quite interesting. I'll have to share that with you on another time, but that was interesting, the academic research into that. So I'll have Ashley, you want to put an example up there of, we had a presentation from the City of Portland auditor on best practices in getting media coverage for your audits. And that was very interesting what they're doing more and more. This is an example, I think, from, is that Portland? Yeah, I think that's the Portland. If you look on your screen, what they're doing now is on their audit reports, they'll make it a headline. You know, they'll say audit of, for example, they have arts tax, and then they'll have colon, promises to voters only partially fulfilled, and then they have a link to the report. And so it's not just, they're not just calling the audit, you know, arts tax audit, because what they found is nobody pays any attention to that. But if you make it a headline, and then they'll send out, they'll release that to the media, and then once in a while they'll get some interest. A reporter will be interested in that particular audit. What they found is a lot of times the reporters are so busy they simply do not read audit reports. But if you make it a headline, a lot of times a reporter will take an interest in the report and then call up the auditor and want to talk about that. And a lot of times the citizens, and then the citizens will see that in the news. The citizens will rarely want to read the audit report, but they just kind of like to know that somebody at the city is looking at that kind of stuff, and you know they'll see a report on the local TV station or the newspaper saying, "Oh, there's auditors that are looking at, you know, whatever topic." Well, that's a good thing. I'm glad somebody's looking at that. Not that they would, you know, maybe 1 in 10,000 people would actually read the report, but that was an interesting approach. And you can put that other one up. I think the next one I found happened to be the city of San Jose. They do the same thing.
That's where our friend is from, right?
What's that?
They did the internal audit here, or the audit on you, wasn't he from San Jose?
No, he was from El Paso, and one was from Seattle. Yeah,
that's right, El Paso.
But in San Jose, they do the same thing. For example, they have a report on police hiring, and then they just make a headline of it. They say police hiring, additional efforts to recruit qualified candidates urgently needed to fill vacancies, or golf courses. Loss of customers and revenues require a new strategy. So that was interesting. More and more audit shops are doing that, just to make the report a headline, you know, maybe 10 to 12 words, So that's.
Are we going to do that?
I'm asking permission. I don't want to do it without your blessing. You try not to make it inflammatory, but you try to sum it up and basically.
Councilor Karski?
I'm not sure if we're on the same vein here, but you mentioned something that sparked my interest. And, you know, cybercrime, I know a lot of citizens of Sioux Falls pay their ongoing water bills, that type of thing, maybe electronically, using repetitive payments, credit cards, that type of thing. What measures have we taken to protect that information from hackers,
Well,
that type of thing?
I think that's what I want to ask when I do that citywide cache is, there's something called that PCI DSS. That's kind of the standard for protecting, that information. So I think I'll incorporate that when we look at it. Just, how do we protect those credit card numbers? Do we encrypt them, or do we have some firewalls? I assume there's some sort of security over that. So,
Thank you.
You're taking, when you accept a credit card payment, you want to protect your customers.
We've
obviously.
heard some very high-profile cases in the news in the recent years.
Yeah, Target's a big example.
You can do it.
Yeah. And certainly, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that somebody could target a city. Usually they're targeting a big retailer, because they have way more credit card numbers, obviously.
We could be an easy target, though.
Yeah, you
People
can't
haven't thought
assume
of
that
yeah.
you can't assume we're not a target. You always have to assume,
Exactly.
so.
Getting back to the point that we were at of listing these, putting these on the internet, the audits that are done on the website, I should say, would that be something that
Well,
they are?
we put them on the website. We just don't release them. Typically the city, when they do a press release, they have a distribution list, and we're going to have a conference on this, or the city council is going to announce this pilot program, and they'll release that to the media. So we do, once they're approved at this meeting, we'll put them on the website, but we don't normally release them to the reporters, although I think there is a distribution list of the local media. So I guess I would ask permission if I could do that, or if you have reservations about doing that, or
That's
your
what I'm
thoughts.
asking.
So
Marty? Seth? Jason? No problem?
the City of Portland auditor talked about, in the 24-hour news cycle, that auditor or reporters are always looking for news. I mean, and so a lot of times they're under the gun to put stuff on their website, because every 15 minutes they're supposed to, update their website. So we may get a little more media attention that way, or they may not. It's up to the reporters or the stations whether they.
The only thing I would caution you about is not using the same headline maker as our local paper does.
Oh. I'll keep that under
That under advisement, please.
Yes. Okay.
Continue with your report.
Okay, so we got a very interesting lecture from a professor of forensic accounting at the University of Kansas. Paul Mason, I believe is his name. He was there last year also. Talked a lot about various fraud schemes. He had a demonstration at his lecture of what he called check washing, and it's exactly what it sounds like. He had us come down from our seats and gathered around, and he had a little, like you would make brownies in one of those little glass containers, and he put acetone in there, and then he had 3 checks, like on an 8.5 by 11. There were 3 checks on there, and he asked for different pens from the audience. He said, I want a really cheap pen. And then I'll ask now for another pen, and then he'd write the checks using those 2 pens. And then he had his own pen, which was a fraud pen that does not dissolve in acetone, or advertise not to, and he wrote out a check. And he said, okay, now we've done that, now let's stick it in the acetone bath. And he did that, and before our eyes, one of the pens immediately dissolved. And then he took it out of the acetone bath, and then it dries very quickly, and there's no smell to it. And then once you've washed a check, you can put anything you want on there, basically. And it really didn't fade the check very much either. I mean, it faded the background color slightly, but he said that's a very common technique. And he says all the checks he writes now, he always uses what they call a fraud pen. And he talked about not putting your mail in the mailbox and put the little flag up and walk away. He never does that. Or in the office, don't put your personal mail in, always put it in a U.S. post office approved receptacle, because people steal mail. And then he also talked about some other fraud schemes and how they work with checks and social engineering, and it was very fascinating. He talked a lot about using positive pay to thwart some of these fraudsters. That's where the city would give a list of the checks that we write every week to the bank, and if a check comes in that doesn't match the payee and the amount, they would call us and say, this doesn't match the list that you gave us. So, and I talked to the Kansas City auditor and the Overland Park auditor, and she said those two cities are using positive pay now just to protect themselves. So check fraud's it's still a big deal, and so that was very interesting. So that was my report.
Super, thank you. Some real interesting things that
Yeah.
I think you'll be able to
Use
take into an audit and use in an audit
I think so.
and take a look at with our finance director, I'm sure, to see if there is something that we can do to make it more secure for our clientele, if you will, or the people of Sioux Falls. Okay, last on our list is a travel request for Kim and Ashley to go to Austin, Texas.
Yes, they very much want to go there, I think. So anyway, ALGA is always a good conference. It's normally a Monday and Tuesday. Sometimes there is a workshop on that Wednesday, like on the like a 2.5 day. So we'll kind of wait and see what the agenda is, whether we have them go to that additional workshop. But certainly the main conference is on Monday and Tuesday, and it's in Austin this year. They rotate it. The best part is there's always good information, but it's always a chance to network with other local government auditors, and so I'd like to send both of those staff auditors there next May. So
Approximate cost?
I think the conference is about $400 to $500 per person, and then there's a hotel and per diem, and then airfare, probably I don't know, $2,500 maybe for two. It kind of depends on the airfare.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. So we have money in the budget. So
Move to approve.
Okay, second. Hearing no other discussion, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, last on the agenda is open discussion. Anything that's come before the audit committee that hasn't been done at this point? I think our next meeting is,
well, I think we'll do it for April, and then we'll coordinate with Ide Bailey, and then that's what we'll plan on
okay,
anyway.
we'll plan on April.
Yeah.
Super. Well, if there's nothing else, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for being here.